Hello and welcome back to On the Soul's Terms podcast. Thanks a lot for joining us today as we make our way out of the 8th and into the 9th house. This is the house of higher learning, the search for meaning, universities, philosophy, ideologies. It's the house of long-distance travel and pilgrimages. It's the house of divination and oracles, teachers, mentors, and guides. It's the house of the Supreme Court, the high laws. It's a house of publishing, broadcasting, and spreading our ideas. And as such, it's related to Sagittarius, the archer, pointing at something above and beyond and aiming for the stars. So that's what this house is known for and known as. But of course, in this series, we're going to make sure we don't just talk about the house, but we really enter it and go into that particular house. But in order to get there, we have to start where we've just been, which is the 8th house. So in the 8th house episode, we made our way down into the chasm or into the dark forest, and we found our little hut there amongst the trees. And now we're realizing that it's been a long, dark night, and a lot has occurred in this dark night. And we see just the very beginnings of dawn, known in the Greek world as Eos, the personification of dawn with her rosy fingers. So the rosy fingers of dawn are starting to come up, and we walk out of this hut and we shake ourselves off. And then we see way up in the distance when we look up that there's something up there. There's some kind of a dwelling up there in that upper world at the top of that mountain. And we know somehow, some way, we have to get to that place. We have to get some kind of an overview, some kind of a sense of everything that happened, some kind of a big picture. And that's really what we'll be exploring in this 9th house, the big picture. And it's enough, in a sense, just to be at that sunrise, just to be at that moment when the sun comes back into the world and the darkness is suddenly a clear light again. And it's enough to see where we're going, because for the 9th house, unlike the 10th, in the 10th, we're going to have to make a path up there. We're going to have to start climbing that mountain. But for the 9th, it's enough to just see it and just to envision it. And we may, in fact, get whisked away there. And there are many ways that we could find ourselves up at the top of that mountain. But the real question is not how to get there, but what is that mountain? And to get some hints for us today, we're going to explore 4 different mountains of ancient Greece, and they're going to help us give us a better sense of this 9th house, each one representing something different about the 9th. Those 4 mountains are the mountains of Helicon, Olympus, Delphi on Mount Parnassus, and Pelion. So which mountain your 9th house is on will really depend on you, depend on what resonates for you. Of course, it will depend on what's in your 9th house and what's on the cusp of your 9th house, what's your 9th house ruler. All of those things will be important as well. But for now, we will have a look at these different mountains and get a good feel for them. The first mountain we're going to explore is the mountain of Helicon. We're going to start down in this underworld place. In fact, our 8th house in this sense is going to be a cave. And in that cave is a woman who has been petrified by the things she's seen in this dark place. So much so that snakes are writhing around her head, all entangled. Around her are littered statues of heroes who have tried to come and rescue her over the days. And we're going to begin with her in this cave. Of course, I'm referring to Medusa. And along comes the great hero Perseus with his winged sandals and his helmet of invisibility and his mirror shield. And Perseus is able to approach Medusa, and then with one swift blow of his sword, off with her head. And in that moment that her head comes off, 2 creatures are birthed from Medusa's body. So this is the moment when we have some kind of sudden awakening or realization about our deep traumatic states, about our freeze states, about everything that has become petrified in us. And suddenly it's off with the head, and the mind is no longer needed for our process, and those entangled snakes can't do much, and the head comes off. And what comes from the body are two creatures. One is the Chrysaor, the giant who has a flaming sword, the sword of discernment, comes out. But also, of course, who comes out of the body of Medusa? But Pegasus, the horse with wings, who flies free out from this body and flies up. And in order to get from the 8th to the 9th, we might just have to hitch a ride on Pegasus. We jump on board and up, up, up we go into the upper world. And we realize that we've made it all the way to Helicon. And as Pegasus, our horse, is just about to reach the top, he stomps his hoof on the ground, and out of the ground is a spring. And in fact, Pegasus means spring. And this spring is called the Hippocrene, which is the horse spring. This is the spring that nourishes and nurtures the Muses, the 9 sisters that are the daughters of Mnemosyne, whose name means cellular memory, and Zeus, the prophetic god, the one who knows all. So the daughters, the 9 daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne are here, and they're delighted when that spring comes up, because now they have this fluid that can keep them fluid and keep them all happy and keep them dancing. And dance they do. And in fact, a large part of their mythology is dancing, and they dance around Apollo, the god of light, and they dance around and around. And these 9 muses are personifications of the arts and the sciences. And so here are the 9 muses. We have Clio, she's the muse of history. Euterpe, she's of music and lyric poetry. Thalia is the muse of comedy. Melpomene, of tragedy. Terpsichore is of dance and choral song. Erato is of love poetry. Polyhymna is of the hymns. Urania is of astronomy and astrology, not separated at this time. And Calliope is the muse of epic poetry. So it's these muses that are fed by the spring of the Pegasus that's been released from the 8th house lair where Medusa has been living for a long time. And their sun springing out is really what happens and occurs here in the 9th house. And through these forms, through these muses, we connect to something of the divine knowing. And it can flow through us, as you can hear, through history, music, comedy, tragedy, dance, and choral song, love poetry, hymns, astronomy, astrology, epic poetry. All of these things are ways for us to remember. They're ways for us to connect again and to remember the true meaning of it all. All of these things do give us a greater sense of meaning, a greater sense of purpose, and they offer, in their own ways, some kind of overview, some kind of a deeper understanding of what it is that's actually going on in this realm. It's the muses that Hesiod begins with in his Theogony. He starts with the muses themselves. It's also where Hermes begins when he first starts to sing of all of creation. He goes back to Mnemosyne, to the mother of all creation, which is memory, and her 9 daughters that guide us, that teach us. Hesiod says, "The muses of Helicon, let us begin with them, who live on the great and mystical mountain of Helicon, and dance around the violet spring on light feet, and the altar of the mighty son of Cronus," which is Zeus, "bathing their tender skin in the spring of Parnassus, or the spring of the horse, or in sacred Olmios. They make their dance on the highest peak of Helicon, lovely, desirable, and they dance with power. Leaping up from there, hidden in the thick mist, they go forth at night, sending forth their most beautiful song." And then he goes on to say they're singing of all of the different gods and goddesses. They're reminding us of the beginning of all things. And Hesiod goes on to say, speaking from the muses, he says, "We know how to speak many false things that look like the truth, and we know how, when we wish, to speak the truth." And this is an extraordinarily apt element of the 9th house, because this is the place where we are looking for that truth with a capital T. We're looking for some kind of authoritative sense of what it all means and what it all is. And going after that truth Obviously, we can get into some of the dogmatic stuff here in the ninth when we just know for sure. And it's that knowing for sure that can get us into all sorts of trouble. So this truth that we're seeking here, it's like in the ninth house, it's a house that is approaching the midheaven if we go this direction, if the zodiacal direction, if we're going from 1st to 12th, then we're approaching the midheaven, we're approaching the top of the sky, and we're getting closer and closer to something like absolute knowledge. But because it's a cadent house, it's like that knowledge is always slipping away as well. So there's something of the movement of the Muses, the spring that they dance around, and the celebration that is in movement. They are not remaining stationary. They are not statues. We're not having statues of the Muses here. They're very much alive beings. And all the way from Homer through Hesiod and many of the poets, they'll begin by calling in the muse before everything that they do. All the Homeric hymns are like that as well. They ask in the Muses to connect to them. So this is where we connect to that higher knowing and that higher frequency. And ultimately what that means is we're connecting to the ninth house. We're connecting through the ninth house into the midheaven and into the top of the sky. And we're praying that something beyond us comes through us. And that's what's really going on in the ninth. But will these muses tell the truth? Will they get us to the truth? And coming back to Hesiod there, we know how to speak many false things that look like the truth. And we know how, when we wish, to speak the truth. So spoke the eloquent daughters of great Zeus. And this is where Hesiod goes on to say that they gave him a staff, the shoot of a blooming laurel, a thing of wonder, and they breathed into him a marvelous voice so that he might celebrate what came before and what will come after. And then they commanded him to sing. So this is a classic works of Hesiod, and we can get a sense of just how much the muses are involved in his process. And if he isn't able to bring in them, then he would find it very difficult to remember, because memory is almost like that spring. Memory is a form of flow state, and memory can take us back and take us back to Mnemosyne, the mother of the muses, can take us back to some kind of knowledge that is moving through us. So, of course, muse is also the root of museum, where we collect all of these things. It's the root of music. Maybe the most pure form of artistry is through music, because it's always moving. We also have it as the root of words like amuse or musing. And so the muses have still found their way into modern language. They have not left. They have not gone anywhere. So we thank them for everything that they're doing on Mount Helicon. And I wonder if this is your ninth house, if it's a connection through channeling the divine or being able to dedicate your work to something greater and something above. If you're an astrologer, maybe you're able to connect in with Urania, the muse of the stars or the heavenly order, the muse that's connected to astronomy and astrology, because as we know, this was astrologia, which was long before the split between meaning and things. And so if you were studying the stars, you were also studying the myths that were in the stars. And the two would not be separated for many, many, many centuries. In fact, it wasn't until, I believe it's the 17th century, where the two get irrevocably split apart to the situation we have today. So that is just one of our ninth house mountains, but one certainly to remember. Where are we going next? Let's see. So now we're going to move to another mountain. We're going to follow our god who's in the middle of all of the muses, and we're going to go with him because he, Apollo, is going to take us over to Mount Parnassus, and he's going to take us to Delphi. So this is the second mountain, Mount Parnassus and Delphi, where we're going to discover a little bit more about the ninth house, especially when it comes to prophecy and divination and oracles. So it was said that from a big stone in the middle of Delphi, the stone that is called the Omphalos, 2 eagles flew out and around the entirety of the world and came back to this one spot, back to the exact same stone. And as they came back to that stone, it was declared that that would be Delphi. That would be the spot for the oracle. Now, in another version of this, that's two dolphins flying out through the celestial sea, out and around and gathering up all the information. So if we can include both of those, then we get all the information of the sea and all of the information of the land through the dolphins and the eagles. But if we stick with the eagles as a ninth house image that comes up again and again with the ninth, it's really that eagle eye view that we're looking for in the ninth, something that can see the whole story, the entirety of our existence and the entirety of existence itself. That's what is being aimed for in the ninth. And it's really just this creature of the sky that is able to see such a vast overview. But as these two eagles come back, then it is declared that this, in fact, will be Delphi. But of course, Delphi itself and oracle traditions generally go back further and further away, long before Apollo hits the scene here. So the first oracle, of course, was Gaia herself. And Gaia gave birth to the Python. She birthed the great Python, and that became the first Pythia was actually a Python itself who had oracular knowing. So we're imagining this Delphi where you would make your way up Mount Parnassus and then eventually see this great serpent and have to stand shivering with fear and terror in front of this serpent and ask your question very carefully and wait for his hissing response. And of course, the Python has the forked tongue, so we always have to be careful. Just like the Muses, they can tell lies, and they can make that look like the truth, or they can actually tell the truth. The same is true of the Python or the Pythia, or I guess more accurately is the truth that they're telling will be unfolded over time, but it may not be exactly what you think when you're receiving the answer. And so it was Gaia who then handed the oracle over to Themis, who is a goddess who has the scales and the sword and the blindfold and the snake around her feet. So Themis was the oracle for a while. And then Phoebe, whose name means light or the light one, she had it and then gifted it to Apollo, the sun god or the god of light, who then took it over. And of course, when Apollo took over the oracle at Delphi, his first move was to kill the Python, which you got to wonder why it was that he needed to kill the Python. The Python was perhaps an ally. But anyway, this is what he decided needed to happen, to kill the Python, but then put a Pythia in the Python's place. And the Pythia was the priestess who was picked out from birth and trained up to have oracular wisdom. And the Pythia, of course, as we know, if you've listened to the podcast before, mythically it is said was standing above a pit of snakes, and the venom or the fumes from the snakes were coming up through the cracks. And so she stood or sat on a tripod in an old state and delivered answers to those seekers that came her way. And of course, many, many seekers came her way asking many, many different things, including emperors and kings and dignitaries from all over the land. And it became quite a political hub over time because many who came tried to win the favor of the Pythia. They tried to win her good verdict so that they could go back and be happy and have good fortune in their lives. So over time, that's what it became. But we can imagine to the wanderer who was moving through this place and came upon the Pythia, what it must have been like. And maybe we can imagine that, what it must be like to approach the Pythia with your question and to ask your question and have the Pythia respond with a forked tongue in a trance state, delivering perfect hexameter poetry to answer your question, and how much that must just have gone right through the logical mind and the barriers and the gatekeepers of consciousness and right into the imaginative mind that may have been able to take that back to our lives with some kind of a knowing that is far, far deeper than what the mind is able to give us. So yes, it was Apollo's oracle after all of that, but in the winter months it was Dionysus's oracle, so it was handed over to Dionysus for those winter months when it was very dark. And we imagine what the Pythia may have been bringing to us in those times that might have been a little different to the time of the great sun god when we're with Dionysus, the god of wine and the god of revelry, what he might have brought in that would have been different to Apollo. And Apollo is, as we've seen so far in our exploration of the ninth house, Apollo is a very important figure for this house because he is that sun god. He is that god of clarity that tries to drive us towards being able to really see very clearly and to see a long way, given that he is an archer. So he has that crisp eye, that clarity through his eyes, like blazing eyes that are able to see a long way off in the distance. He's often described as having golden hair, like locks of golden hair flowing, and is typically seen as a very youthful character, an eternal youth figure. So it's Apollo's realm, the ninth house, because in the ninth house, the sun has its joy here. And we can imagine why it would have its joy, because at this time of day, between midday and 2 p.m., if we're using Placidus' house system, between midday and 2 p.m., this is when the sun is in the ninth. So it's really at its strength, but it's also on its way to its decline. And then, of course, when we follow the sky that way, the sun has its day, it has its joy in the ninth, but then heads down into the eighth when we're going that direction. Of course, the direction we're going for this series is the other way. We're going to go from the ninth and into the 10th. And as I was saying at the start of the episode, that means we get the sight set on where we're heading. And in the 10th house, we can actually make a track to go there. But for now, it's enough just to vision it and to allow ourselves to imagine it in this ninth house. Because in a way, the ninth house is that house of the imaginal mind or the right brain, whereas the third house typically is connected to the left brain. So we have like the Mercury and the Jupiter of the mercurial left brain and the Jupiterian right brain. And so it's this tension between the two that we have here. But another way to look at it is to think about Apollo with the sun in its joy here in the ninth, opposite the third house where the moon is in its joy, and perhaps that's where his sister Artemis is. So in the tension between the two of them, we could say that rather than that being a left brain, right brain distinction, the third house where Artemis is the reality at hand. So this is where we are right there with nature, with the wild, and we're in the night world where the moon is most happy. And the lunar frequencies where we're trusting our instincts, trusting our gut, moving with what is around us in our immediate environment and delighting in that, in the lunar light. But this is where the sun god is, where Apollo is, rather than what's at hand. We're looking at the entirety of the landscape. So we're trying to get the big information. We're trying to get information that we can take from our felt experience in the third, but then feed it into the ninth and at ninth. And in the ninth, we can codify that information and turn it into systems of thought. And hence, this is a house that rules universities and higher mind and higher education and religion and spirituality. And so this is a house that gives us the structures for that, because it's claiming to have that sort of sun god authority over this realm. And so with that codified information, we can start to really gather up information. So whilst the third house is I think, the ninth house, as Howard Susportus says, can be thought of as the we think. So this is our collective understanding of reality that we're putting all together in systems of thought. So that's what's happening here in this ninth house. Of course, if we're looking at those two, Artemis and Apollo, the twins, they have a mother. Obviously, they have the same mother, Leto. And Leto has a sister named Asteria. And Asteria is a little bit like Urania in that it means the starry one. So it's another figure in mythology that points to the stars and the sky and points to constellations and constellating meanings and gathering up understanding by perceiving patterns. Now, Asteria's daughter is Hecate, and that's very interesting because Hecate was considered to be the triple goddess in that she had power over heaven, earth, and the sea. So this is our connection to the cousin, therefore, of Apollo and Artemis is Hecate. And we can really hear Hecate's presence in Delphi, no matter how bright it all wants to get and how clear-eyed and Apollo-like it wants to get. There's always got to be the connection with a snake or the priestess or some kind of initiate that has knowledge beyond the everyday. So it's almost like Apollo is never really fully separated from his cousin Hecate, and Hecate is maybe never separated from Apollo either. So they're connected in that way. So maybe it's Delphi and Mount Parnassus that is best representative of your particular ninth house. But for now, we're going to leave behind this house where we followed Apollo from Helicon. We've been over from Helicon, we've been to Delphi. And now we're going to see what else is in store for us. We're going to go up to none other than Mount Olympus, because that is a very ninth house venue. That's where the big banquet in the sky is going to happen. That's when we're going to feel the abundance of the ninth house. We're also going to get involved in this overseas travel, this opening of the mind, this witnessing of other customs that happens in this house. And we're going to go and see what life is like on Olympus. But how will we get there? Well, there's one way that I know that isn't the safest way, but it is a way to get there, and that's to follow the path of Ganymede. And Ganymede was a prince there, a prince of Troy. And he was minding his business with his dogs one day when out of nowhere came the eagle Aquila, swooped down and snatched him up and took him up to Mount Olympus, where he became the cupbearer of the gods. So that is one way to get up there, to take the eagle path up to the upper world of Mount Olympus. And what might we find on Mount Olympus? Well, this is where the pantheon of gods live. So we've got Zeus and Hera presiding over everything, and then we've got all the other great gods of Mount Olympus that the pantheon live there, and others can visit from time to time, and they all have a delightful banquet and feast there. And from Olympus, they can see all, specifically and particularly Zeus, who is able to see all and everything from up there in his kingdom. So this is where we might get that famous Albert Einstein quote. So I want to know how God created the world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomenon. I want to know his thoughts. The rest are details. And so this is what we might get a piece of when we're up in Mount Olympus, when we've taken the eagle ride and we're up here. But then it's impossible, isn't it, to know the mind of God, to know the mind of Zeus. So this is why Ganymede is helpful to us, because at least he's able to, by being the cupbearer, serve the gods a few drinks and see if their tongues get a little loose. They may drop a few secrets of the universe on us if we're able to hang around long enough. But speaking of Zeus here, I think it's worth mentioning exactly how Zeus knows what he knows, and how did he get to this level of knowledge. And I think it's important to acknowledge that within Zeus is the Oceanid Metis, who he took into his own belly, who has knowledge of the ocean, and it's that oceanic knowledge that mixes with Zeus's knowledge of the sky as a sky father that ultimately gives that true and full knowledge. Is that it's not just Zeus himself, but it's Zeus plus the ocean. It's Zeus plus Metis, the Oceanid, that gives us that impression of an all-knowingness. So yes, this is another ninth house element, and this is also being Zeus. It's also the laws of the land happen up here. So this is the supreme court, the high courts. They are based up here on Mount Olympus in their original form, and from here they come down and filter into all of our supreme courts and high courts. This is the ultimate we think, as in we think this is good and this is bad, and we think this should be punished this way and this should be rewarded this way. The courts and the judges are up here in the ninth house, and it's from the ninth house that we come down and bring down our judgments. It reminds us of another mountain, Mount Sinai, where Moses comes down with his commandments. This is what we may find up here in Mount Olympus as another stop on our way through the ninth house. So maybe this is your ninth house, where you are interested in the mind of God. So therefore, a place where we may get codified religion. It's definitely a place where we will get judgment and assessment of what's morally right and wrong, good or bad, and where we get these high courts or supreme courts up here on Olympus. We've covered 3 of our 4 mountains, and now we're actually going to make our way just down from Olympus and come over and up to Mount Pelion. And in Mount Pelion, we're going to meet the centaur Chiron. And why on earth would we go and see Chiron when we're up here in the ninth? This is clearly not somewhere he likes to be. He's someone who lives in a cave most of the time and tends to shy away from any of these big events. But he's here nonetheless because he has his own place in the ninth house, because he is the wise guide and the teacher and the mentor. I'm not sure exactly how to get to Chiron. The heroes that found their way to him were all just freshly born. So maybe, as this is also the house of rebirth, we need to be freshly born with our beginner mind in order to find him and in order to receive his tutelage. Also, Chiron has some kind of a link to Sagittarius, the constellation, because in the modern stars we see that as a centaur who is holding the bow and arrow and pointing it up to the sky. And of course, Sagittarius is the ninth sign of the zodiac, and this is the ninth house, so they're linked through that order. But yes, an interesting element about this came up in the course that I'm teaching alongside Martha Hines. She has me as a guest teacher on her program, which is called The Stars Speak. It's a program where we're looking through all of the constellations of the sky, not just the ones of the zodiac, and getting a bigger mythic web, a bigger weaving through the sky of all of those different constellations, which has been just such a beautiful, fascinating journey. But when we were looking at Sagittarius, something that she discovered in her research was that previously it used to be just a human or a god archer, maybe Apollo as the archer, but it was not a centaur. And what happened is, over time, through the shifting, changing sky, the constellation of Centaurus, which is a centaur, drifted away so it could no longer be seen in that northern hemisphere. And because they missed the centaur so much, they turned Sagittarius into a centaur. So in a way, then, we can see that Sagittarius as centaur is a fairly new development in constellation art and in the myths behind the constellations. But nonetheless, there is that connection between the centaur within Sagittarius and Chiron because of his wisdom, because of his teaching, and because of his role as a teacher. So often with Chiron, we get caught on just that one element of his story, that he got wounded. And of course, he did get wounded. But as I always like to say, he was already 800 years old before he got wounded. So he lived as a centaur for a very, very long time. And in that time, he was always a teacher and a mentor. If you could find his cave and you came to him humbly, wanting to learn from him, he would be happy to teach you. And of course, he was the teacher of heroes. So the ones that came to him when they were just born were the heroes Jason and Achilles, so two very famous heroes that came to him from very young to receive his tutelage. And of course, his most fond and cherished student, Asclepius, who was also foster-fathered by Chiron and Chariclo. Here we have that teaching of everything that we need to know to be heroic in our lives, which is a very ninth house proposition, to be heroic, to have a clear fire and a clear purpose and a clear mission. These are the things that Chiron, in his mentorship and as a teacher, is able to teach us. And it goes along the triads of houses, really, because the fire houses begin in the first house, where we get that first spark of I am, and then are developed in the fifth house, where we get that sense of our passions and what we enjoy and what we really love. And we bring that from the fifth into the ninth, where we give it some real shape and some real purpose and set our direction in life. This is the process of the spirit. And even though we're on the soul's terms, this is when we can start to embrace and enjoy and celebrate the spirit, which is the opposite energy of the soul. It's just that the spirit is going up. As you can hear, we're going to the top of mountains. We're on a winged horse. We're getting swept away by an eagle. We've got two eagles flying around the world. All of this upward energy. We've even got bows and arrows pointing up. So this is where the spirit is liking to ascend. And the opposite of that is soul, which may have happened in the 8th house or the 4th house and later on in the 12th house, where we're going down. And we're seeking the deepest possible place for our nourishment, where all of that water can come down, where we can be blessed by that water. We're going down into matter and into entanglement, into the mycelium, into the earth, into the underground, and we're getting wisdom that way. Of course, what's amazing about Chiron in his situation is that he's still half horse and half human. So he hasn't lost touch with what they call the chthonic world, which means born from the earth. He's been born from the earth, but he's also got the wherewithal to look up at the stars. And he is himself an astrologer and an astronomer. He is a healer, a naturopath. He's a chiropractor. His name, Chiron, is chiropractor. He works with his hands much more so than he works with his mind. And he's never really all that interested in all the spoils or the banquets of Olympus. He wants to be in his cave doing his tinctures. And this is Chiron, and he also wants to teach. He's got lots to share. And if we're willing and we know how to find him, and we're willing to wander off into Mount Pelion, which is in the ancient world of Thessaly, where the witches and the crone figures were ruling, if we're able to go there, we might be able to find him, and Asclepius is given to him and taught everything that Chiron knows, and then develops the dream world into his ability to understand reality through also the dreaming. So this is Chiron, and of course his wife, Chariclo, who used to be a nymph, but she's changed shape to become a centaur in order to be with Chiron, and the two of them live together. But there's one more story that I think sums up ninth house consciousness in one little ditty that is taken from Ovid's Metamorphoses. And in this story, it's the story of the daughter of Chiron and Chariclo, and her name is Osiooi. It's a difficult name. I'm doing my best to pronounce that, but I believe is pronounced Osiooi. And her name means swift flowing. So there was a day where she was just resting, and perhaps she'd been dreaming, perhaps she'd been sleeping and dreaming, and into her dreams came an incredibly intense prophetic vision. And she rushed out from her bedroom and rushed to her father Chiron and started speaking at 1,000,000 miles an hour. And she said, "Oh my God, Dad, I can see it all. I can see that you're going to have this Asclepius. He's going to be this incredible healer. He's going to be an even greater healer than you. He's going to be given to you one day from his birth, and you're going to take him on as foster father. You'll raise him and you'll teach everything you know. And then eventually he's going to take it even further and start a whole cult of the Asclepius. They're going to go way into the future. It's going to be incredible. And also, I can see, yeah, right, Hercules is going to come by. Oh no, Dad, watch out, because Hercules is going to have a bow and arrow and you're going to try to help to fight. One of those arrows is going to go astray. It's going to eventually hit you. You're going to be wounded. You're going to be in so much pain." And then she just kept going and going, and she was revealing all of the future, everything that was going to happen. And Zeus looked down on this, and he realized that if she keeps going like this, she may just reveal all the secrets of the universe. And if all of the secrets of the universe were revealed by one person, then what would the universe even be without its secrets? If we knew everything, then there wouldn't be really any point in living. There'd be no meaning to any of this if everything was revealed. And so he turned her in that moment, slowly but surely, into a horse. Osiooi ran as a mare swiftly out into the forest and was never seen again. And so I think with Osiooi turning back into a horse, we sort of return from where we came from Medusa, and the offspring of Poseidon and Medusa being Pegasus, who flew out from her body up into these mountains, up into Helicon. And I hope that by exploring these 4 different mountains of the ancient world, we're able to learn something about knowing, about knowledge, about truth. We're able to learn something about that higher world and that higher frequency, and the tempering of the spirit that happens here through the help of Chiron and the prophetic visions that come from the oracle at Delphi, and the other many oracles that are around, and even those eagles that can fly all the way around the world and get that grand overview that help us know what it is we're doing and know what it is we're here for. That's the promise of the ninth house. That's the promise of the spirit, to give us a sustained vision that we can take with us into our lives, that we can live out and that we can have unfold through us, through our lifetime as it changes and morphs over the course of our existence on this planet. And then hopefully, like the Muses speaking through us, we can take that to uplift and take that to help and take that to give more art and more poetry and more flow and more of the sciences as well, and all of the things that the ninth house can offer us by giving us that enlightened and enthusiastic vision that can carry us like the Pegasus through our lives all the way into the midheaven, and we can offer that to the world. And the midheaven is where we'll go next as we cross another threshold and then enter the 10th house. That's coming up as we make our way from the 9th into the 10th. So we really are getting to the apex of the sky. We are getting to the zenith. We are finding our way to the most elevated point. And it's here that we'll move from the vision of the 9th into the actual path that'll take us there in the 10th of our career, our calling, and our vocation. But meanwhile, we've got another couple of episodes here in the 9th house that'll take us up to the solstice. We're going to be hearing from an interview that I'm about to have with Amanda Simon, who I just met at the Living Astrologies Conference in Santa Fe. Amanda and I got along so well that we thought it'd be a shame not to record an episode, and she has a very strong focus on the 9th house, so we're going to be celebrating the 9th together and hopefully moved by the Muses and musing together. And I'll also have a fairy tale coming up just as we head into that solstice time. There'll be a fairy tale that will hopefully give us an even brighter view of this very enlightening house of the 9th. Thanks a lot for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you for listening to On the Soul's Terms podcast. To support the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review, sharing with friends, or becoming a patron at patreon.com/onthesoulsterms. Until next time.